this is a nice giveaway from Sharada and David worked together in this Agile CSA framework. I'm going to ask David and Sharada to really walk us through this. I think this is a great example of, again, this is not the only example of how to do Agile CSA, or I'm going to start calling it CSX, Ken. Go ahead, Sharada.
I can walk through it.
Go ahead.
And everybody, take out your binoculars because I'm not an old guy, but I still can't see any of this. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. But really what we wanted to focus on, right, with this is two major things. The first thing is really focus in on the development stage, right? And go through, you have the iterative planning and analysis, you have your design construction, you have your iterative testing, and that's going round and round. And all throughout that, you're leveraging your developer testing for your functional testing, right? You're doing your risk-based approach, right? Your requirements risk assessment and all your other deliverables on the left side there are still the same from your typical SDLC, but really what this is doing is going, as you're designing and developing, you're also creating test cases and executing those test cases, potentially in an ad hoc, in an exploratory manner, an unscripted manner, as Ken was saying, based on the risk. Then at some point you go and move to a kind of hardening sprint, right, or multiple hardening sprints based on that. And then at that point, you can address any regression testing that needs to be done from a functional perspective. And then finally, you can get to your user testing. And the idea here is that CSA is kind of moving away. I mean, you could call it IQ, OQ, PQ if you want, right, or UAT, but moving away from having that V model of I need to test these requirements in OQ, I need to test these specifications in IQ, I need to check these user requirements or high-level business needs in my UAT, and just looking at it as, hey, I'm doing functional testing on all my functional requirements, my config and my design specs, and then I'm going to do my user testing at a high level on my business process flow, right? And that could also be unscripted. And then at that point, you go through and the system goes live and deploys, and it enters the change control and operational phase. So my takeaways from this, right, if you go to the next slide, Mr. Mufsali.
Yes, sir.
Are four major items, right, of what we're trying to get, or actually five here, is within this framework, and I already said this, right, it's more flexible, it's more responsive, and what we're trying to do is to meet agile development in harmony, right? We don't want validation to be a separate activity from design and development. We want those two things to really kind of work together. The second major takeaway from the Agile CSA framework is that we're shifting the testing burden left, right? Developer testing, like Khaled said, is going to be leveraged, and then continuous testing minimizes surprises later downstream, to Sharada's point earlier, right? We're finding defects, we're finding issues earlier because we're testing earlier. The next point is that the deliverables are iterative, right? When you're creating these requirement specs, you're creating these test plans and test protocols, they're not going to be finalized, or they don't need to be finalized, and that the testing is going to take that risk-based approach, focusing on requirements, risk, or functional impact to patient safety, product quality, and data integrity. And then based on the test assurance level that you identify, you're going to test commensurate with that risk. The fourth point here, again, this should go without saying, but change control for validation artifacts, because they're iterative, is not a required activity. We're really not going to get into the doc change controls until after the system is either in the hardening sprint and then changes after they're deployed. And then finally, the de-emphasis on IQ, OQ, PQ, and emphasizing more of a functional or user testing perspective. So I don't know if anybody has anything to add kind of on an Agile CSA framework. I know we've kind of touched on some of these points already.
Or disagree or agree?
Or agree, yeah. Again, this is kind of just my takeaway from what we're trying to accomplish when we're proceduralizing this framework.